house. The child goes to the teacher who will guide that child. What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot. Materialism has to do with when you are Hello, it's wonderful to have all of you back here in the studio with us for this course in Values and Spirituality. Today we will be covering non-punitive methods of correction, which is a way of looking at behavior and how to modify behavior or correct behavior. Sister Denish is with me in the studio today, and I cannot wait to see what she has to say on the subject. So Sister Denish, a very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Now tell me, what made you come up with non-punitive methods of correction? Let's start from where things are right now. In every country across the globe, there are various methods for correcting behavior that involve some measure of punishment. And there is a reason why you're not resorting to any system that currently exists, but are coming up with something new. What is the reason for this?
Well, I am of the opinion that there's a problem with conventional morality, which claims to believe in non-violence, for example, but it's enforced through violence. You see, punitive methods of corrections is another way of saying violent methods of correction. You want a person to be good. The behavior of that person is inconvenient for you, so you call it bad. Because you're in a position of power, you will use a ruler, a strap, a slipper, whatever, corporal punishment, and you will cause pain to that person in the idea that the pain will make them believe that that behavior is bad behavior. But the reality is it doesn't do anything of the sort. And what it does is encourage the people who are classified as deviant to become more deviant. And so it's counterproductive on the whole. People who go against the rules, go against something that's already been described. Now, if you haven't described the rules and you punish a person and you make up the rules as you go along, it is a way of subjugating that person. And a subjugated person is not a correct person. A subjugated person is oppressed, and their way of handling it would be to become manipulative, to be more deviant, to find ways to get back at you that are, more less direct, or they will find ways to get other people to be strafed rather than themselves. So the whole thing of making people good using violence doesn't seem to make much sense, and educators nowadays and the education system nowadays under the what I would call the human rights based system of values doesn't profess this. So again, it's a question of the archaic social attitudes based in the scriptures and traditions against modern systems of values based in principle of the rights of a child and the rights of a person, and the idea that it doesn't work anyway, so why would you do it?
You started the paragraph on a captivating note. It reads, "A society based on spirituality and values must use means of correction that are consistent with its aspirations." Let us start at the end. What is the aspirations of a spiritually and value-based society?
The aspirations would be that society reflects the principles of peace, purity, love, personal power, and happiness. That doesn't go with violence.
You go on to say that psychologists have found a connection between a teacher who uses threats, force, coercion, etc., and parental attitudes and behavior and patterns of crime, drug use, sexual deviance, and violence. That is quite a strong link.
It's a very strong link, and it's quite interesting to see that the social research has pointed this out, because the archaic social values set out in writing in the traditional literature that you should use violence to keep the people who are under your control in order. And so people do. And they are validated by these highly esteemed bodies of literature. And now the research has said that these beliefs actually cause damage, and they don't do what they say that they're doing. And because of the indicators, it becomes really a clash of values. And the education system is the responsibility of the state. And if you have a state which is a theocracy, or which is not a democracy, which is not espousing the principles of human rights and so on, you also find that that state uses draconian punishments very easily, and keeps the population very dominated and subjugated. And then somebody who is interested in human rights will find that all of this is tremendously violated population, and then they will perhaps even seek to remove that leader who is violating these principles. In a state where the principles of human rights are given importance, then it's not allowed to use corporal punishment in the school system.
The consequences are also contained in the last line of your paragraph, which reads, punitive correction has contributed to the modern problems of low self-esteem, crime, indiscipline, and breakdown in families and social systems. I think I speak on behalf of the viewer who is surprised that the consequences of receiving a smack or 2 or 20 as a child can have such dire consequences as an adult, and far-reaching. And the consequences doesn't just stay with the victim of the violence in the name of correcting behavior, it is also perpetuated to their children and their children.
Exactly. And, you know, while the state can apply rules of correction in the school system, it doesn't have the same jurisdiction within families. In some cases it takes that jurisdiction, but most states don't. You know, one of the things that has to be taken into consideration is that within families the state tends to keep out. And where you have families which are dysfunctional, part of a dysfunctional family is draconian punishment of the children. Then when those children go into school, they're not very good at learning because of all of that punishment. They're very oppressed and suppressed children. Then bring it to the adult world. You have domestic violence, where usually a woman is being beaten relatively regularly by her husband, and it may be to do with use of alcohol or not, because a sober person can be violent just as well as a drunken person can. It's all to do with attitudes. And if a man believes that his religion condones the use of violence against his wife, she is also not going to be able to study. she's also not going to be able to develop herself, because violence damages a person. There's no evidence to show that a person improved through the use of violence, and a lot of studies have come up with this. But yet the archaic social values deeply believe in the use of violence. And so again, it's really a matter of clash of these two sets of values. Now, if you bring in the philosophy of karma to this, the perpetrator of violence is going to have to pay. And one of the things that you see is that people who are very violent in their adult years usually are shown to have been very badly violated in their childhood. And so the problem is that it gets passed from generation to generation, and it usually gets worse with the generations. So it's very important to raise this as a topic of discussion, because there are so many people who don't talk about it, but they believe it. And unless you open up the subject and say punitive methods of correction are ineffective always, nobody learns by them, ever. And a person is disempowered. And so there is no value that we can call a positive value that can support the idea of violence. But the society is deeply wedded to the idea of violence, partly because of fear. You want to be secure, so you violate whoever might be an enemy. In carnivorous society, where people are eating meat, you have to kill in order to eat meat. And so violence and killing is considered fine in certain conditions. If you need to eat, you have to kill. And so there's an ambivalence in relation to violence that really needs to be talked through.
You have thus far clearly enunciated the problem, and in paragraph 2 you propose a solution. You say, it is effective to set boundaries and clear guidelines for personal discipline and balance these with love, respect, kindness and sensitivity. It is a fallacy to presume that this would spoil the younger generation. This fallacy has been perpetuated for centuries.
Well, it's set out in the religious texts, which were written a couple of thousand years ago, like spare the rod and spoil the child. That comes from the scriptures. It's a biblical statement. And you find it throughout the Abrahamic traditions, and you also find it in some of the other traditions. Buddhism, on the other hand, is very vocal about the importance of non-violence. And so in Buddhism, if a person is engaging in violence, that they are hard put to it to reconcile it with their religious traditions, but culturally it's right there, you see, in terms of the other traditions that are not part of the stated religion. So it's again back to the clash between archaic values and modern human rights based values. When you look at child psychology, for example, it's very clearly stated that what a child needs is love and boundaries. When you have a dysfunctional family where there is violence, and the infractions of the child may be very small, the amount of violence really big, and also inconsistent, because if there is alcohol use in the family, then when the father is drunk, it's one kind of rules. When he's sober, it's another kind of rules. If the mother is getting beaten, you have to see that. Secondary trauma sets in. And this is why I think the target of this course is really not the children, it's the parents. Because you don't usually get children except in extremely rare cases, as being the instigators of the dysfunctionality of the family. It's in the parents, grandparents. The best way to deal with this is to really talk about it, so that people who are studying this and who come from a dysfunctional or violent social environment have a forum in which to talk about it, because otherwise it's a taboo subject, not allowed to be talked about, and the state tends to stay out of it unless the victim prosecutes.
Paragraph 3 reads, rehabilitation rather than punishment is required when antisocial behavior is recurrent and rules are repeatedly broken. Acting out is almost always a reaction to traumas experienced in earlier life. It is more honest and compassionate to consider such negative behavior as a cry for help rather than a sign of inherent wickedness. Acting out is also a sign of spiritual depletion. So you go more then into the understanding of it, and you propose rehabilitation as a solution. Sister Denish, as you know, I have a legal background and my profession is obvious to you. And part and parcel of my profession is meting out punishment for individuals who broke the law. What I'm wondering is the following. If you understand that a thief is a thief, and if you show him compassion for being a thief, the fact that you understand that he's a thief doesn't make him any less of a thief.
Well, I would put it a different way. I wouldn't say the person is a thief. I would say there is evidence to suggest that you repeatedly steal, and you're getting punished for stealing, not for being something.
Okay, so what are you saying then of the various judicial systems in the world? How must they operate according to this new model that you're proposing? I'm wondering, where does one draw the line between realism, understanding, and naivety? And I'm asking this question with respect.
The legal setup of a country makes it very clear that if you do this, this, and this, and you're caught, you will be taken to court and you will be receiving a certain punishment. So that's clear. You're not allowed, there's laws against stealing, murdering, fraud, etc. You know, in some places, if you spit out your chewing gum, you go for punishment, but you know that in advance. Now, a child in a situation of acting out is maybe being noisy, and so you know, they're not doing something illegal. They're doing something antisocial. And the teacher who thinks this is a wicked child will apply different forms of punishment, but it's not going to do anything. Now, if the teacher has the wisdom to understand that here are some signs to say that all is not well at home, then they'll deal with it differently. There are studies which have shown that children who get sexually assaulted, one of their reactions is to steal. And they're not stealing because they feel like stealing. They're stealing, it's a reaction to some other very big trauma. And because the society doesn't get it, is lacking in information, they see the behavior and they say, you are a thief. But what this course is saying is, you can't say that about somebody. You have to say, you stole.
May I interrupt at this stage? Are you saying a human being is not their behavior?
Exactly.
So then, who are you if you are not your behavior? Are you your words?
You say your words.
But you're not your words?
No.
So a person is not their behavior, according to this model, and a person is not their words.
A person performs actions. They may be good or bad. But a person is not what they do. But society looks at a person as what they do.
Is it not the case that your words and your actions make a statement about who you are?
Well, this is a very interesting question. Who are you?
And your answer is?
Very difficult question to answer. Ask anybody, do you know who you are? And if they think about it a little deeply, the answer will always be, well, no, I really don't know who I am. I would love to know who I am.
Are you saying then that errant behavior, criminal behavior, should not be punished?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
What I'm saying is the person cannot be called a thief or a murderer or whatever. I think we need to change our language and say, this is a person who repeatedly kills. This is a serial killer, and we have evidence, okay? This one kills in a serial manner. Because, you see, you label a person, and there's no way for that person to come back from the activity that happened to them, or that they did, right?
Mm.
Which means that once a person has been identified in that way, they're condemned, you see. And it may even be that that person was framed or set up or whatever, but they're still known as that, you know. There was an interesting story in the media recently of a person who was on death row for 22 years. And then a judge said, oh, well, actually, we have evidence to show that you didn't commit that crime 22 years later, you know, after much very severe physical punishment in the jail and so on and so forth. But this was a very interesting case because the person was motivated to remain a decent person, this was his words, no matter how badly he was treated. So this is a sign of someone who took a really bad situation of total injustice and so on, and turned it to his advantage, which is exactly what spirituality proposes. You see, whenever you find yourself in a situation of where you're in a really bad situation, you are suffering from character assassination or falsely accused or whatever. Because this sort of thing happens a lot. You know, if you want to make somebody at a disadvantage, you will accuse them of being something, tell everybody else that this is a thief. This is not a thief. But they look at him as a thief because of that labeling.
I now want to go to the solution that you propose at the end of paragraph 3. Meditation training and psychotherapeutic counseling have been shown repeatedly to be effective in enabling a person to gain the skills and confidence to transform themselves and become a functional participant in society. Tell us how this works, especially if a person is serving time for having committed not just an antisocial act, but a criminal act in his country.
Yes, definitely.
Whether it's being a thief or being a murderer.
A person who is incarcerated has a lot of time on their hands, and there's all sorts of restrictions, and they're away from the social environment in which they grew up, although not totally, because certain sections of society tend to get criminalized more than other sections. Now, I did have some experience of doing this. What I found was really important is that you go into a gathering of people who are all labeled as bad people, and you start saying to them, okay, you're my brother. They say, what? What do you mean? I said, yeah, you're a human being, I'm a human being, this is human family, you're my brother. You start to talk to a person in such a way that you're seeing the possibility of good in them. What happens? That starts to grow. I used to give everyone in the group, maybe be 70 or 80 people, I would give everyone a little card which said, you know, you're a sweet soul, you are a loving person, you have a kind heart, stuff like that, you know, very positive little messages. And it would very often have the effect of that person going into almost like a naive state of mind. You really think I have a loving heart? And I would say, well, the card says so, so maybe you do. Do you have a loving heart? Yeah, I do, you know. And you can see that the person was cut off from their emotional development at a very young age. And that this is kind of brings them back to that moment, and you start to actually do something healing, something therapeutic, by making it possible for that person to go back and catch up with themselves in terms of their emotional and their social development. Of course, it's a long process, but I have seen personally people start to believe in themselves and start to look at each other differently, just simply as a result of being treated as a good quality human being instead of being under this label.
Sister Denise, unfortunately we have to stop here. I'm going to take the subject up in the next episode as well, because we haven't come to the end of this rather rich discussion and or controversial discussion. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again for the continuation of this very fascinating subject. Take care and goodbye.